In my previous videos about people traveling to parallel worlds, I briefly mentioned the story of a hunter who encountered something extraterrestrial in the woods. Today we'll take a closer look at this story with all the details. The story of a hunter who met guests from other worlds is how the story sounds in the original, without hidden names and titles. Carl Higdon was 41 years old and worked in the oil industry. He was a big fan of hunting on the weekends, so he decided to go into the woods. On October 25, 1974, Carl got into his car and, on the advice of an experienced hunter he had met earlier, drove to the Medicine Bow National Forest in Carbon County, Wyoming. Higdon was an experienced hunter himself, but had never been to this area before. This was a remote area where there was little sign of human presence in the forest. Higdon had driven here by car on a dirt road, but then decided to walk over a small forested hill. Apparently, it was better to avoid scaring away the local wildlife. When he was on the other side of the hill, he came upon a herd of deer, one of which was a large and handsome male with branching antlers, a coveted prey for any hunter. Not believing his luck, Higdon was about to shoot the deer, but suddenly something very strange happened. He took aim and fired, but suddenly the shot was completely silent, and the rifle had no recoil. And then it was like a movie. Higdon watched in amazement as the bullet from the rifle flew ahead, as if in very slow motion. The bullet traveled slowly, only a few feet, and then fell to the ground as if it had hit an invisible barrier. The hunter watched it all with a sinking heart, completely perplexed by what was happening. At some point, he noticed that the atmosphere around him was tense, as if filled with static electricity. Without thinking, the man reached over to pick up the bullet and saw that it was flattened as if it had hit something very hard. The deer had already fled the clearing, but Higdon wasn't alone. Higdon said, "I heard a noise like a branch snapping. I looked to my right and saw a human figure in the shadows of the trees. The figure was as tall as a tall man and was wearing a tight black jumpsuit, like the ones divers wear for diving. The humanoid was also wearing a pair of seatbelts, and around his waist was a metal belt with a yellow star ornament." The man was pretty surprised, because the creature's head was pretty different from a human's. It didn't have any ears, its eyes were small and deep-set in the eye sockets, and its mouth looked like an open slit with 3 large teeth. It was pretty interesting to see that 2 short tendrils grew from the forehead of the humanoid. The hair on the creature's head looked like straw and stood vertically upwards. The neck of the creature seemed to be completely absent. The creepy head was sitting right on its shoulders, merging right into its body. The arms were very long, and one of the arms had something resembling a chisel at the end instead of a hand, and the other arm had no hand at all. This strange entity looked at Higdon for a couple of moments, then took a few steps toward him and asked him in the purest English, "How are you? How are you feeling?" Stunned beyond belief, after a couple of seconds, Higdon replied on automatic, "Fine." The creature nodded its head at this and came even closer. Despite its inhuman appearance, Carl noted that the creature did not look threatening at all. It approached the man and then asked him if he was hungry. Before the hunter could answer, the strange humanoid pulled out a plastic bag from somewhere and sent it through the air toward Higdon, as if by telekinesis. He caught the bag with his hands, opened it, and found 4 pills inside. The creature explained that these pills would give him satiety for the day. The hunter took one out and swallowed it, then put the rest in his pocket. I want to pause here for a moment to point out that our hero was pretty naive. Why put everything in his mouth? Let's assume that Higdon was just a very trusting person and an inquisitive experimenter. Okay, let's ignore that and move on. Then the creature finally introduced himself and said his name was Auso-1. Auso then pointed to something behind him. Higdon saw a transparent, cube-shaped object that looked like a large box. He saw no entrance or exit, no windows or landing gear. The box was just standing on the ground. "It was much smaller than any of our commercial or military airplanes," says Higdon. "You might think I'm crazy, but this tiny thing was about 5 feet high, about 6 feet long and 4 feet wide." Auso asked Higdon if he wanted to try out the facility. Before Higdon could answer, he found himself inside the box. It was as if he had been teleported there. He didn't understand how he had fit into this tiny space. But already here, panic seized him, and he saw that his hands and feet were tied with some ribbons. When he calmed down a bit and came to his senses, he noticed that not far from him, there was a force field in which 5 deer were hovering. They were as if frozen, and the hunter was pretty sure that they were the same deer he had seen in the clearing. Then he saw another creature that looked a lot like Auso. Here's a note from the narrator himself. Although this cube looked small on the outside, it was somehow much larger inside. This second creature walked up to Carl and put a kind of helmet on his head. Then the ship took off. Higdon could watch quietly through the transparent walls as they soared upward, and there at the bottom of the hill was his abandoned car, standing lonely. Auso pointed some kind of device at it, and the car disappeared. Then they flew even higher, and now their location looked more like the Earth's orbit. Then they flew as if through deep space, and then Auso said that they had already traveled 163,000 light miles from Earth. Suddenly, a planet unknown to the hunter appeared before them. The ship approached a huge tower. Around that tower were spinning many colored lights like powerful searchlights. As Carl himself said, "They were so bright that it was painful to keep my eyes open. I tried to cover my face with my hands and screamed, 'Turn them off! They're burning me! I couldn't stand their heat!'" What happened next, Higdon remembers with difficulty. At some point he saw a group of people outside. Yes, ordinary people like you and me, but he had no way of knowing why they were here or who they were. Then Auso told him that his race came to Earth regularly to hunt and fish. Well, that sounds kind of vague in this context. The hunter was then placed in a room where he was scanned by some device he didn't recognize. Auso said the hunter wasn't fit for their purpose, and so they had to bring him back home. Surprisingly, they were back on Earth as quickly as they had left it. Before releasing Higdon, Auso took the bag of pills from him and then wanted to take his gun, but said he was forbidden to do so. The aliens then disappeared, and Higdon found himself alone in the woods. Completely disoriented and scared, he wandered around the forest until he found a vehicle. He climbed into it, and only after a little bit did he realize that it was actually his car. He used a walkie-talkie to send out a distress signal, and then sat in the car for a while, waiting for help to arrive. When the search party found him, it turned out that his car was at the bottom of a deep forest ravine 5 miles from where he had left it. There were no roads nearby, but most interestingly, there were no tire tracks leading into the ravine. This fact was already proof that Higdon was telling the truth. His wife was among the searchers. Interestingly, he didn't recognize her right away, probably because of the stress he'd been under. Another interesting fact is that in this area on the eve of the hunter's abduction, other people saw strange lights in the sky. When Higdon was found, he was in such a state that he couldn't say much. All he could say was that the bullet had been flattened when it hit something invisible. Most of his memories were obtained through regressive hypnosis. This is a fairly well-known practice that has been used for many years by people to successfully pull out of the unconscious their deepest fears, memories, try to fight with intrusive nightmares, and so on. When immersed in regressive hypnosis, it is as if the person is reliving the events of the past. Then, a little later, a medical examination of the hunter was also carried out, and it was found out that from his lungs were missing scars that remained from a long time ago suffered from tuberculosis. And from the kidneys were missing stones with which he had been suffering for a long time. Among other things, they found a flattened bullet in his jacket pocket. The research showed that it could only get such damage by hitting a very hard surface, harder than a tree or a stone in the forest. But life is life, and the public is often harsh. Later, Carl was repeatedly called a fraud, allegedly making it all up to become famous. However, the strange fact of finding his car where it shouldn't be is proof that the story could be real. Please share your thoughts about the Carl Higdon story in the comments. Do you think it's true, and if so, how? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.